Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe Mikanovsky, product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. On today's episode, Moshe and I are happy to be speaking with author and product leader Deepa Goyal about her book, API Analytics for Product Managers. So let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Deepa.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Hey, Moshe.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Deepa. Welcome to the show. Really nice meeting you.
Great to be here. I'm really excited about this conversation. I don't think I have yet talked about the making of the book or like how it came about on any other conversations I've been on. So I'm really excited about this.
Great. Moshe and I love to talk to authors about books and how they help product managers. So, and this is a great topic.
Yeah, I was never an API product person, but I was an API developer, and I developed a lot of APIs in my days back when it was SOAP, XML over SOAP. So, and then I learned as a product, my first product management position, actually, we moved the company I was working for, we moved to SOAP. And then I learned what SOAP is all about. I had to use the APIs, but I wasn't the product manager on the API themselves. And I had to utilize them. My team did develop some APIs in some ways. So I had to learn Postman back then. And you were working for Postman, right?
Yes, that's right. So I lead product strategy at Postman, but I have actually worked in APIs for a while. Previously, I was at PayPal. I led their API experience, and that was a very interesting space because PayPal is just the scale is amazing, and there's very unique challenges that I learned about because a very different aspect from what I learned at Twilio, where I was before PayPal. So it's been a few years in the API space for me, and something I find interesting, like you said, that you were a developer and you built APIs, and I think that has been the journey of APIs. For the longest time, there was no product management. I feel like it's such a new thing that has pretty much come about in the last 5 or 6 years. Like I think when I joined Twilio and there was no guidance for me on how to be an API product manager. Like what am I even managing?
Yeah, and it's true because many times, well, for anyone that is listening to us that don't know what API is,
That's it's good. Let's clarify.
we didn't mention that. We didn't mention that what API is because we are assuming that everyone know what API are, right? I even sometimes forget what the acronym is, but it's application programming interface.
Application programming interface.
Amazing. So this is a way of applications to talk to each other, as simple as that. And I think we should talk a little later on about agent these days, agentic AI, and how they talk with each other. But let's leave it for now. Let's not get there yet. But the main usage of APIs, well, there are two main usages. One is internal, one is external. The internal one, and I think that's where most companies are. They have their internal API, and then that's why they don't consider it a product because they don't productize it to the world, even though internally it is a product. And then when they start talking about externalizing it to the world, it becomes like, oh, maybe now we need a product person on that to make it, a real product. Is that how you've seen as well, or am I?
So the interesting thing is there's definitely more internal facing APIs across the world than, across all organizations than there are external facing. Usually what has happened in the industry is that, for utilities, actually back in 2012, I think there was a memo from Jeff Bezos that went out to Amazon and everybody, he said that I want all the teams to talk to each other through APIs. I want all teams to have APIs and just that's how teams should talk to each other. And then that became this way of looking at things differently and like organizations powered by API, this transformation happened. There's also the boom of fintech APIs, I think, is a huge driver in public facing APIs and Twilio. So I think when these fintech APIs and Twilio, like SMS voice APIs, started becoming, big revenue businesses,
Hmm.
and Stripe, that became, the highest valued private company, it really woke everybody up to the potential of APIs as products and not just like this utility thing that just like, you build, other than internal and external APIs, there's also partner APIs, and people don't realize that it is so huge that a lot of companies, their entire business model has like, of course, there's the internal APIs, which are more around operations and inter-team systems, but the partner APIs is actually how they make money, where they make special APIs for specific customers and their use cases. And the way they do it is like they want to offer a specific type of service or, specialized offering for big customers. And it
Hmm.
drives a lot of revenue. And at some point, when something, any piece of software starts to drive revenue, you want to understand, how is it selling? Who's using it? How can we make it better? Is
Yep.
there, how can we find the lookalike audience? What is the experience? How do we measure it? So those questions, the same way, for the longest time, people didn't realize they needed websites. And then as soon as everybody started building websites, we needed Google Analytics.
Hmm. Yep. The first time I got introduced to APIs is through what you mentioned, fintech. So looking at things like Stripe and Plaid and a lot of the new fintech API first companies out there. And so that's where I first got introduced as a product manager. We were focused on payments internally and helping customers with process their payments and get payments over to the banking system. So that's where I first encountered it. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear about the partner API perspective where you're building out APIs for specific use cases, and that's like extendability, I guess, of your solutions out to different partners to meet these different needs they all have. So that's pretty cool to hear.
I also got introduced to APIs through fintech. I was
Hmm.
at Prosper Marketplace for a long time, and my first experience with APIs was building partner APIs.
Mm.
Because investors on the platform had kind of their different needs, and we started with just reporting kind of APIs, and then we started, more complicated needs of different customers in terms of how much they invest and controls and the whole experience around investor experience started with just a few APIs, and it became like a bigger product side. And I got very fascinated by APIs. I started playing around with public APIs like Instagram API or Twitter API, and just it was because I'm also a data person. Before
Hmm.
I went into product, I was a data scientist and I worked in data. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
I can just live in data and I can get all this data.
Yep.
So, just, you know, even if there's curiosity, right, of things, and if I had a curiosity, there's some API that gives me some data to look at. And that was just so exciting for me. And I remember, so when I started my career, most of the tools were like enterprise tools. For learning a tool, you had to. This is like pre PLG, right? Where only like I think even like Informatica or like all these different
Hmm.
tools were there, and you couldn't just sign up and use them as an individual. You had to be employed with like an enterprise who had a license, and uh, then we had this boom of you know just freemium experience, and users can just sign up and PLG. So I think a lot of it just came about at the same time, where you start to have all this data, and then you can also just sign up and use APIs and get all this data, or like start making voice calls with Twilio, or like start sending a text. It was just very exciting for me.
That's cool. Yeah, I too am analytics, as listeners know. Analytics and data science is like my background as well, even prior to being a product manager. So yeah, it sounds as though like APIs democratize data, and that's what's
Mhm.
kind of like turned them into products. Because you hear a lot about data products and
Mhm.
API as a product, and so
Hmm.
maybe APIs have really made data more accessible to people who did not have it before, and that's why
An
it's grown in
interesting
popularity.
That's an interesting perspective because to me, and I mentioned before about the APIs that I developed, it was also in fintech.
Mm.
So all of us started with APIs in fintech.
Yes.
to me, it was about connecting different systems together.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I could still do stuff with the data. I could put my hands over data because we had, different types of data transfers, and we could get the data. But to connect systems and make the systems real life, give the right functionality to the users. At the end of the day, as product people, it's all about the users. So give them the right functionality that will make their life easier, will get them unstuck in the process as much as possible, and get everything seamless and all that stuff. That's where API has so powerful because it connects so many different systems together that one company would be very hard for them to put together. Um,
Yep. So I do actually talk about that early in my book, which is basically this idea that APIs came about because, Google has done maps really well. It doesn't make sense for Uber to reinvent Google Maps.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much easier for them to use Google's APIs, and that's what early Uber, I think they have switched from it since then, but that's what it was built on for many, many years. Because ultimately, when you have, you're basically getting world-class application and experience for your customers because you're directly buying it from people who do it well, and
Mm-hmm.
you get to get your product off the ground without having to build this. So the time to market for new products because just skyrocketed because of all these companies having APIs. And if you think about how Twilio powers customer service, or call centers, helplines, and across different industries, a lot of it is amazing how quickly it was built, because you just like plug in some APIs together and you can build really amazing customer
yeah,
experience.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the actually these days founders, maybe in the past also, I many times tell them you don't necessarily have to build the front end systems that try to drive all the users to your system. If you build an enabling technology that can be embedded or can be used through services and APIs or whatever way it is, then there is so much power in that,
Mm-hmm.
enabling
Mhm.
other many other case use cases. Well, let's talk about the book because and it's interesting. And I had this question immediately when I saw the book and then when I started reading it, because it's a very comprehensive book about
Mm-hmm.
almost everything you can think about in APIs, geared towards product managers. But you did call it API analytics for PMs, and I was wondering why analytics. Now, you told us that you are data driven and you love data and stuff like that, so maybe that's part of the answer. But I had this question for you about why you put the name analytics in the name of the book.
So a few different reasons. The way I was thinking about it is it's I didn't necessarily just want to say that this is how you do API product management, but the core thing is really about how do you ship successful APIs? How do you measure success? And although I said for product managers, I think the fact that analytics are at the center of the book, I also wanted to make sure that people who don't necessarily have a product manager title and do manage APIs, which is a fact. A lot of architects and engineering leads, they are, especially for internal APIs, they are the ones who are kind of wearing the product management hat.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ensure that those people find it relevant and
Ah,
uh, interesting.
makes sense.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
second aspect was something I mentioned earlier, was like, when you have a website, people know that you need Google Analytics or like some kind of analytics. But this idea that when you have an API, you need API analytics is not something that people have really put together. And I wanted to enable that thought process.
I see. Okay. So
Very interesting.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just for the product manager. So you didn't want to alienate other people that are not product managers from reading it. And also making sure that analytics is really part of it. So you don't just build the APIs for the sake of building APIs. You build them for the sake of a product, and there is some success criteria and some outcomes that you want to get from it. And the way to measure those outcomes is through analyzing it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So tell us a bit more about the book. How did you come by to write it?
Mhm.
So I've always had this idea that, working in Silicon Valley is such a privilege that we get to work on a lot of problems that nobody else has come across yet. And I think given that position, like when I started working at Twilio, that's a lot of my book actually started after being 1 year at Twilio. And I was looking at all these things that I had learned and I was doing there, just so fascinating. There were so many aspects of it that were not written about. And I also felt like a lot of the product management knowledge and guidance that we have available, that any product manager has available, is very B2C, product oriented, and it doesn't really serve the B2B products and this kind of no UI technology product. So how anybody who's trying to take on that challenge for the first time, they really have no resources.
Mhm.
So I really wanted, and I have seen so many people do that. Like over the years, I had seen all these people take on API product management. For the first year, we're just like figuring out how to go about it. And I was like, if I wrote about it, then maybe the next PM who starts it will have some idea of at least some frameworks to approach this problem with.
Yeah.
So that's really how I decided and thought I should write a book.
That's
That's great. It's helped me out as well. As a reader of your book, it's been helpful for me to even think about the core concepts of the book as API as a product and then the developer as a customer. So that's like a big piece of what I'm working through myself and what, I think a lot of companies probably miss on. They think of the actual user of their application, and they don't always think of the developer experience. That's the consumer of that API. And so I'm working through that exercise right now. And as I read your book, I'm thinking about that chapter on understanding the developer and what they want. And we have to make stuff really easy for them so they can get up to speed because what they've been asked for is, hey, I need you to hook up to this other application. They may not even
Yep.
know what your application does. They're just asked to do a job and they need something easy, something understandable and consumable. And then they need to execute it and go on and work on some other APIs. So I love that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and as in terms of your book, the developer as a customer or user.
It's very interesting, right? Some of the points you made around like understanding the developer is so hard. And I think a lot of times people don't realize when people think about developer, they think about somebody who's just like coding for fun and making a fun little
Hmm.
app. But when we as product managers are looking at developers, we're thinking about a developer who is working in a company and who's just been asked to make this integration happen. And
Hmm.
there's a timeline, there is results, and then there is a lack of domain knowledge, because
Hmm.
I bet that most of the people who integrate with Stripe don't are not finance experts,
Right.
right? So
Right.
when we think about building for these users, you cannot assume that they understand your domain. There's all this terminology that they have to unwind. So the challenge becomes, how do we get them to learn about the APIs, how they're organized, what the domains are, what are the keywords they're looking at, and just get to that first API call really quickly to get
Yep.
started ultimately. And one of the first things that I learned about just approaching developer as a customer was this differentiation of like, is it an individual developer, just like that's the person who's building some things, like a startup founder, or just somebody playing around with APIs, or is this like a mid-size company developer? Sometimes they're doing two three things and they're just like, oh, I'm just learning to code with Python, and so I thought I'll code something together. Or it is like an enterprise level developer, because their approaches to APIs are just so different, their needs are different, and if you think about it, the decision maker is different, because In an individual startup, a person can decide this, hey, I'm just going to use PayPal instead of Stripe. He has the power. But in an enterprise, a lot of times the decision of like which vendor we are going with, that doesn't necessarily rely on one person, or
Mhm.
like on the developer, right? It's kind of distributed decision making, much broader decision making.
Yeah.
So there it's like a developer is just trying to close the Jira ticket.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's true with every B2B, and this is really a B2B because the developer is part of the business, right? I've been interviewing in the past a company that will be building also a platform for security specific in health. And they actually had a lot of challenges, not so much with the buyers because the buyers saw the value, but actually with the developers, because sometimes the developers would say, we can do it ourselves. We can develop
Mhm.
it on our own. Like, why do you bring this? So it's an interesting. Maybe it's a positioning, maybe it's a marketing more than anything than the API itself. But as a product manager for APIs, I would also try to think about that. How to the users here are the developers, right?
Mhm.
But
Right.
reduce their anxiety towards building something that it's not theirs. It's like someone else's or something like that.
Yeah, so you're touching upon a few different things there. So when an experience is significantly easier, like it's just so much easier to integrate with Google Maps than build Google Maps, that contrast is
True,
significant.
true.
It's just so much easier to integrate with Stripe or PayPal than build it. You just cannot. There are people who try to integrate with different like banks, because a lot of banks do have APIs. It's just that
Mhm.
Yeah.
what happens is for a developer to go through each of those integrations, then manage them, then a lot of those challenges
That's
are
exactly what I had to do. That's exactly what I had to do. But that was in 2005, right? So back then, we didn't have the Stripe. We didn't have the middleman that deals with that. I
yeah.
had to do PCI
Mhm.
compliance on my own.
So the other thing is also within like Twilio, right? So AT&T has their own APIs, T-Mobile has their own APIs. But for a developer, yes, sure, they can go by one and do it, but then they have to understand the coverage, what is better for who. So a lot of times this abstraction layer of like Twilio in between or Stripe or PayPal in between solves significant problems. And the other part of what you mentioned earlier is the trust. Because if you look at how these API products have their status pages where you see this 99.99% uptime, uh, so they know that a lot of the problems, I'm sure they occur, but they're handled in the background so that you, as a business, don't get disrupted if one of the payment providers had some issue.
Yeah.
There's all
Mhm.
this infrastructure you don't have to maintain. There's all this DevOps you don't have to do, like all this debugging in
Mhm.
times of error. So that's really where the value lies. Is this ultimately? It's like it skews the scale towards buy
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
in a build versus buy decision.
Absolutely. So, what did you learn from in the process of writing the book? Because I know writing books is takes time, and you do some research, and you interview people, and you don't know everything, and you structure it, and then so did you learn some new things through that process?
So I started with a Notion page where I just wrote a very, very basic contents page that I had in my mind, and maybe a few of the key metrics that I was like, these. So I had this like, I want to write about these metrics that nobody talks about.
Mhm.
That's really how it started. It's like these are metrics that I've found to be just so insightful, and I feel like more people need to know about this. So I wrote that, and then I started adding like, oh, but to understand this, you need some context. And then for understanding that, you need more context. And then it's like, oh, you have this metrics. What do you do with it? Oh, you need, other aspects you need to understand, like what happens when this metrics looks bad. What
Mm.
what is good or bad in terms of a metric. So that's how I started building out my contents page, which was kind of like a mind map. Uh, and then I started showing it to people, and people I knew, my manager, people who had a little bit more experience in APIs, and I was like, hey, I think this is really interesting, and I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people. It's more than a blog, so I think it should be a book.
But it's great that he did validation because
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's my next question would be if you treated it like a product, but it
right.
seems like you did.
Yeah, and I got the chance right about then to meet Kin Lane,
Hmm.
and he's also written the foreword for my book, and I showed it to him, and I was like, if he knows so much and about APIs, and he's been there, done that in the world of APIs, and I showed it to him, and his face lit up. He was like, yes, you should absolutely write it.
Uh,
And that's actually what I ended up doing. I joined Postman, and he actually guided me through the, writing of the book. And Postman provided me with, like, so we have so many other experts on the team, like Arnaud Laurent, but we have, a good set of experts in APIs. And I got to brainstorm and get a lot of feedback. Sometimes we would, talk about ideas, and like, oh, I was thinking about developers, and what has been your experience, and learning
mhm.
from them, learning from conversations we were having with Postman customers. So I think I was really fortunate to have
A
tremendous
lot of support.
resources.
That's great. Yeah, you're like an incubator for API book writing, basically. That's perfect. You're like, hey, I have these ideas. I got this whole audience available to me, so
I
came
can
about.
think of a better place as Postman. I mean,
Yeah,
Postman, I believe, is like the leading
number one, I would
product to
say.
test APIs and
API tooling.
right.
Hmm.
So that's a great place to be just for that.
Yeah.
Amazing. Did you learn anything you didn't know about APIs?
Quite a bit, actually. And I think there's of course the people I had around to brainstorm with, but also the publisher Pact gave me an editor and a project manager. So it was interesting how the people, in my team were giving me a lot of actual feedback on, like, helping me develop like concrete ideas. And I was getting feedback on my writing from the
Mm.
editor and the project manager. One of the things that I think that really came about is something I learned while writing, was a lot around the API lifecycle.
Mm.
And it was such a huge process to solidify. There were so many iterations even within, and it's interesting because at Postman we were thinking about the same problem at the same time. So it wasn't like that's what I was working on, and that's what I was writing about.
Shared experience.
Mhm.
So, like I said, I was just very fortunate. And
Yeah,
so I was basically just really deeply thinking about life cycle. That's what we were talking to customers about. And uh, but it took so long to solidify,
Mm,
and there were so many things I learned about in that process,
mm,
especially developing this better understanding of, like, not just like, oh, there's a customer and there's a producer, but like even more granular understanding. Where does that handshake happen? Who
mm.
are the people involved? And really breaking it down, and having a very informed opinion around those aspects, I think was a pretty big learning experience while writing the book.
I see. Yeah. Interesting. Is it different, the life cycle of the APIs? Is it different than other type of digital products?
Yes. So definitely very different from B2C products And I think the B2B nature of APIs is, what leads to this. So there's, I guess, two main aspects. One is the B2B aspect where the user of the API, which is the developer, is oftentimes different from the customer who is, or the buyer. The team that decides, oh, we are going to integrate with PayPal might be
Right.
different, just like a business decision of like, this is what our customers want.
Mm.
People use PayPal, so we need to provide PayPal integration.
Right.
And but the developer is the one who's going to land on the document.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so the buyer and user personas are significantly different.
Mhm.
The other thing that happens is in a B2C product, the feedback loop is so quick. It's like I saw this bag and I hit
Yeah.
I clicked on the ad and I went to the site and I did made a checkout. It happens within a very short period of time.
Right.
But with an API, a developer has to understand the API. Maybe it will, I don't know how much time they have, and then or how high a priority or how far into that decision they are. They might spend a little bit or a lot of time on the API documentation, and then they ultimately make this first call, they do the integration, activate, and all that. That's actually the journey is just so much longer
Yeah.
than like a B2C product. And I think that really complicates the life cycle.
Mhm.
And then you bring in the idea of like in an enterprise setup, you have as a producer of APIs, you have a sales team, and they are the people who are creating demos for your APIs for specific use cases. And then they're helping the developers on the customer side, and then customers are taking it and then building with it, and then you're getting all this feedback. Sometimes you are especially in case of partner APIs, you're making changes
Yeah.
to the
Mm.
APIs as
Yeah,
you're collaborating.
I wanted to touch on that point, not just on the partner API, but general API, external APIs, because the what you mentioned about the buyer and the buyer and the user is very common in B2B. But one of the things that I always had, sometimes as a creator of the API, sometimes as the user of the API, I had issues with compatibility, backward compatibility, new versions of the APIs that are coming in. How do you tell the users, those developers, how do you tell all of your users if the API changed? And if it changed, is it still backward compatible or not? And then how do you make them in their development cycle? Because it has to go, if they have to change something in their product to fit your changed API, what does that mean to their cycle? So those were always quite complex things to deal with.
Absolutely. So I have a lot of information on this in my book, and I think that's another thing that I learned from my experience of like like launching new versions of APIs, trying to compel users to switch over, but most of the time their ability to switch over to the new version depends on their development cycle.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times it's not like you can just push an app update. It's really you need to have this back and forth, and like this relationship with the customer, or really as a product manager sometimes you just have to make it compelling
Mm.
that this has some significant features
Right.
that we didn't have before,
Yeah,
and then they are motivated to make the put in the work of
yeah,
a development cycle, because
yeah,
that's, I think, a pretty big investment.
Right.
Uh,
absolutely.
so that's the thing is how how do you, most of the time the challenge is how do you make that compelling case without actually talking to developers, because most of the time you wouldn't.
Mhm.
As an API product manager, you don't have the luxury to just like, email all the developers that there's a new version. Even if you do, most of the time they don't see it. So,
Yeah, no,
uh,
it's a big challenge. Absolutely. It's a big challenge. I think that what SaaS helped a lot of companies solve the problem of hosted products. Like back in the day before SaaS, our products had to be hosted on the client side or co-location or whatever it is. So there was all of those versions floating around, and they have to convince them to upgrade to the latest version. And SaaS does it for you. You don't have to convince anyone. It still could not have done it for APIs because with APIs, it's really about the code that they're using in their product. But I want to maybe switch to something we mentioned earlier, and I want to get to that, to this elephant in the room, which is AI and agent AI and stuff like that. Do you think that with how things are evolving with that, do you think that APIs will be replaced by AI agents?
Actually, on the contrary, I think APIs are seeing a boom because of, this AI revolution. And if you think about it, it's like when SaaS products started getting built, just more APIs started getting built. And then those APIs became products on their own. And then, of course, APIs are about how applications talk to each other. And now they will be the layer between the user and so the user talks to AI, AI talks to APIs. I think what it really changes and improves, to be honest, is the developer experience
Mhm.
because a lot of the integration pains as a product manager, if I'm building my APIs in a way that AI can understand it, then definitely a developer can understand it. So developer is getting a
Right.
free upgrade because of because of agents. And as this conversation around how do you make your APIs AI ready,
Mhm.
uh, just this week, actually, my good friend Rebecca Hawk from PayPal gave a talk at PostCon where she talked about being a good AI citizen.
Mm.
And it's really a lot of services like PayPal. They are not trying to build the next chat GPT. What they are trying to build is how things like chat GPT can use PayPal in a secure way, in a trustworthy way. Those are the kind of challenges that they would be thinking about. How
Yeah,
do we enable developers
Yep.
to trust our APIs, and how can we make our APIs good enough for AI?
interesting.
So
Mhm.
Totally.
that's really where the conversation has started to go, is just like, how do we build for agents?
Yeah.
I
That's
think more and more people are simply going to build more APIs
yep.
and trying to integrate their services into agentic experiences
Mhm, mhm.
more
Interesting.
easily.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. That's where I see it as well. I mean, I see like just like APIs, and enable applications to talk to each other. It's going to enable agents to talk to each other, and it's just going to further your product's reach throughout different use cases. If you have the API that can hook up with, Anthropic and OpenAI and all these other models and such, and bring that data, it's just going to unlock new potential.
Just this morning, to exactly what you said, HubSpot announced that they got a deep integration with OpenAI. Just this morning,
That's
I
it.
think I saw Ramesh's LinkedIn post that now we have a deep integration, so you can actually ask ChatGPT to manage or do analytics of your HubSpot campaigns.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's
Yeah.
really the future, is
mhm,
this abstraction layer. In a way, it's like a user, instead of going directly to HubSpot and going through a UI, is just using ChatGPT as an abstraction layer,
Right.
um,
yeah,
and
at the end of
talking
the
It's the
day,
politely.
central spot for
At the end
all
of the
that.
day, agentic AIs with their interfaces like ChatGPT or etc., they're just another type of interface. Instead of using forms, traditional forms to enter information into a screen, you use your text.
Hmm.
The same way that Alexa and Hey Google were a new interface by talking, which is also using an AI, but we just people didn't realize that. I think that AI will be much more successful actually when people would not realize that they're using AI than when they know they're using AI.
Hmm.
Because that's where it's really embedded within everything that we do. And the interesting thing is that even before ChatGPT, the examples like Hey Google and Alexa are using AI already for a few years, and we just,
Hmm.
people just didn't realize that that's what they're using. So as an interface, as a new interface to interact with computers, it makes a lot of sense. And that's where what you said about APIs making that work in the backend is really interesting. I guess there could be even one layer of backend agents, and I think that this layer already exists these days. It's agents that are not interfaces to human beings, but it's agents that are interfaces to other agents. So basically, A to A. In those cases, I wonder if they really eventually, I don't know if this is the case today, I didn't do enough research on that, but if eventually they will not even need APIs anymore, it will be just two AI-based, agents talking with each other in order to provide whatever the front end, eventually, whichever front end that is going to be, will need.
I think the APIs will still be there. I think it's just the integration cycle will become so seamless that it would feel like the agents are just simply talking to each other.
Interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. No, that's
I
interesting.
think
So
it's kind of like how,
it's another layer of abstraction that is going to happen between the APIs and the end users.
yeah, think about how right now when
Hmm.
you as a user, you say, "Oh, I want to pay for my Uber using PayPal." There was a whole integration cycle of some developer at Uber integrated PayPal APIs and all that time that went into it.
Yeah.
Now imagine on the fly if an agent says, "Hey, I want to book a flight using Expedia," and imagine that your AI agent could just like magically has all your credentials and everything, but go from like signing up for Expedia's APIs and like, getting everything done and like actually executing the task in like no time.
Hmm.
Even if they were using APIs, you would feel it's just magic.
Yeah.
Is it that
Well, and
that fact?
this is what Google I/O announced a few weeks ago that you will be able to buy, or maybe you can already do that through their agent directly. So you don't even have to go to the site where they got the information from you. You can just tell it to buy it for you. No, this is really interesting, and it's an interesting discussion because Matt and I are always getting into that AI discussion, and how AI is going to change
You're coming around. You're coming around,
society.
Moshe.
I don't
You're
know if I
talking.
came around,
You're
but I have
talking the
no choice.
talk.
I have no choice. I have no choice. Yes,
You're coming over to the
but
dark side.
this is, I think, really an interesting discussion because it's almost like those building blocks. API is a building block at the end of the day. It's enabler for other things to happen, and AI has those aspects as well. The LLM is a big building block, and the interface is that you do NLP with it, right? So it's always interesting to see how this building block eventually are going to end up because I think it's still in flux these days. I think it's still there is a
In
lot
very early stages. It's
exactly
in
there
the
is a lot of innovation still going on, and it's really hard to see
Imagine it's
where.
like right now, if there's like 50 different PayPal APIs that a developer has to like, scan through and learn. I think that most of services eventually would just have one AI-based API that can, that another AI can talk to. And you know, ultimately it's like just the experience just gets very abstracted
Yeah, exactly.
and directed towards an agent to be able to just sign up and start making uh, transactions. So because you don't have a developer and you have a little bit different level of trust because you have an
Mm.
agent coming in. So maybe security looks different, maybe
Mhm.
auth looks different, and the experience looks much simpler. And I think ultimately that's the kind of experience that we are moving towards, where
Yeah.
integration itself is just so frictionless.
I do see that with existing systems, but what about this theoretical new provider, a competitor to PayPal that is doing payments and stuff like that? And instead of building APIs, they build an AI agent that knows how to, without APIs, but rather with models, AI models that it can be trained on what to do with this data. Because APIs, at the end of the day, what it does, you build logic into the API that will somehow do something on the data and will, so it will have inputs and outputs, right? And maybe there is a way to do that there is no need for to build API at all, but rather to build an agent that will know this is the vast data that I have, this is the type of transactions that could happen with that, this is the type of things people are looking for, so actions on this data. Now just do it for me. You see what I'm saying, where I'm going with that?
Yeah, so I think I see that vision. But the thing is that for any agent to magically do something, if it goes outside its own system, right, goes to any external service, be it uh, Google Maps or any other service, they still have to jump through the hoops
Hmm.
on that service, and that service, so it really depends on how they expose their service. And right now APIs are the only way
Yeah,
that
of
you
course.
can
But
interact.
that's,
So the
yeah.
other aspect is maybe the so an agent can theoretically do two things: either figure out the APIs and do it that way, or anything that's to can be done in the UI, like actually do it like an operator mode and do it for you. But I think even, let's say, doing it in operator mode, if you're trying to get your agent to book a ticket for you, they still need your credit card information. Your credit
Mhm.
card information still has to get processed through all the different APIs and everything in the background for whatever payment service provider is being used. So I think, at least it might change. I don't know. I don't know what I don't know, but at least
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
immediate term, I think since the service providers still need that security, that auth, uh, there is no real workaround, even for an agent,
Yeah.
uh, to just do anything make a PayPal payment without PayPal's permission,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something completely different. To a product manager that is not an API product manager, which is most product managers, how much APIs knowledge would you suggest them to learn? And do you think the book is also for them, or it might be a bit too much?
I think it's definitely for product managers everywhere. I think in general, especially now that, markets are very different now than they were a few years ago, and I think a lot of product roles have become a lot more technical. Now that, AI is in the picture, everybody is having to learn more skills, and, product managers are creating wireframes and more prototypes. We used to create wireframes, now we're doing prototypes.
Hmm.
So everybody's expanding the scope of their role,
Mm.
and just the nature of work is becoming more and more technical as you start to kind of take on some of these responsibilities. And I think product management in general is just going to continue to get more and more technical.
Mm.
Imagine if,
Hmm.
a lot of the easy stuff will be done by AI.
Right. That's right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
AI is doing the PRDs and all this other
Yeah.
writing and stuff. Like you can contribute a lot of value by doing more of the technical stuff that AI does not
You
quite
don't
do
need
yet.
you don't need a product manager to build yet another shipping API, right?
Hmm.
But it's when you're building more complicated products and experiences that you actually need a product manager. And I think uh, because of just where we are with
Hmm.
technology and the industry, everybody needs to acquire more technical knowledge. And I think APIs are almost the best and the easiest first step to
Mhm.
become more technical. And that's why I think a lot of what I have covered in my book is geared towards PMs who don't have expertise or experience working with APIs or technology products or B2B products, and start to kind of, even if you don't understand, like if you've never made an API call in your life, you can still grasp the the concept and the product side of it, all the way from like user research to measuring results to you know creating partnering with sales and support, because that's really where any PM who doesn't have prior experience, that's where they would start.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so much opportunity left out there. I work in the GovTech space, so we're doing a lot with legacy systems, systems that have been around for a long time, and there's a lot of potential left, untapped potential when it comes to APIs and working with legacy systems. So, from a product manager new to the space, wanting to get more technical, this is working in government and these kinds of spaces where APIs haven't really matured. There's a lot of opportunity left, so I definitely recommend that to people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I got kind of a combo question. So it's a revenue metric, revenue generation perspective, and then also want to ask you about the metrics in general. What key metrics you're most interested in when it comes to APIs as a PM. So from a revenue perspective, there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to APIs. You have an application, you have data on your side that people want to access and bring over to other systems. So what would be like one of your like go-to pricing strategies, or what would be a preferred way to look at things? So there's different ones out there in terms of tier-based pricing, consumption pricing. What like have you seen as a successful revenue approach?
So there's a lot of different pricing models, and I do talk about that in the book, and
Mm-hmm.
because it's a very interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like, Google Maps APIs is, by API call. Twilio is actually not by API call, but like number of messages per message or per voice call. If you look at how that relates to most of the fintech, is also PayPal doesn't make money with number of API calls you make. PayPal makes money when you actually make a transfer of funds,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the commission then make on that transaction. So it based on the business model,
Mm-hmm.
the API has to mirror the business model. And then as a product manager, you have interesting challenges such as like if you are building a product that if you are building an API that is charged per transaction, or sorry, per API call, then you don't have the luxury to make it complicated where if any point if your customers are having to make additional calls, then you're essentially just like
It's not fair.
inflating
Yeah.
the cost.
Yes. It's not,
So
yeah, it's not really fair.
exactly. So that's where, the business model and the pricing model has to really closely align so that
Very
you're
good.
thinking about how the customer is thinking about value and cost in terms of using this as a service.
Right. And that's where if you're thinking about charging API as here's a product and here's an amount for that API, it has to have diverse features associated with it. So that's where like quotas and rate limits come into it and those kinds of things. So you're selling the value of that product to the customer. So that's great.
What was the second
So
part of your question?
Oh yeah, so like kind of leading into
I
that.
might
So
not have.
I guess the other part of that would be from the metrics. So, revenue, looking at revenue, it's a lagging indicator of success. Like, hey, we made this much money. But from a leading indicator, like what's some things that you think about from an analytic perspective? Like what should a PM be looking out for from an adoption rate? How successful is this API going to be where I can make money from it?
So very broadly, I think my favorite metrics are time to first call and time to activation.
Hmm.
Uh, and the most interesting challenge here is how do you identify activation?
Hmm.
Uh, because APIs are essentially a product of scale, and for the most part. For example, PayPal has a sandbox environment that's great. So most of the time, a developer can just sign up and start playing around in the sandbox. They're not really making any real transactions yet. But Twilio doesn't really have a sandbox. You actually start making real SMSs and real voice calls in the real world. And so even the experience being different there really changes in terms of at which point you get the signal that they are going into production. So the signals can look very different depending on like, is it generally after 200 API calls, you just see the spike because they've gone live and
That's
they're
right.
putting all their traffic, right? Versus no, there's a process where you move into production with your documentation being approved, which is the case for more fintech experiences, where it's like there's a process involved, and as the fintech service provider, you kind of know when they go live because you enable
Mhm.
them to go live.
That's right.
So that is what identifies as activation. And because it's so challenging to identify that signal, uh, but it's very important.
Hmm.
And it could look different for different API products based on the nature of the product, the way, the scale of the customer. Because where there's an individual developer, they might take more time
Hmm.
tinkering around with your API versus a lot of times with an enterprise customer, you usually have like a technical sales enablement who will kind of just give them the code, and then one day you have this big customer, and it in the data it looks like, oh, this customer just came live and is making millions of calls. So you wouldn't really know in the data, so it looks very different. What is activation? So time to first call, I think, is a great measure of how
Hmm.
good your developer experience is. And time to activation or time to value, like the first transaction, are really good indicators of like, will this eventually give value
Right.
to, is this in a place where it's driving value? Those are really
That's
two
great.
important.
Yeah,
I
because I mean that ties into the revenue perspective, like when it comes to pricing and packaging as well. So like we just mentioned, like you mentioned, the calls. So time to first call, if you're banking your revenue on how long that's going to take, if you're banking on that one developer to get active, you're not making the money that you invested in the product. So that's what's so fascinating about the API PM space is that it really is a product and you have to treat it that way. The same things you would do for a standard application. Think about those things when it comes to a product itself. Pricing and packaging, go to market, looking at success metrics after you launch. Those are all key things that you have to think about. And I'm actually working on all that stuff today. So,
every single thing we discuss brings another question to mind. So it's like a rolling thing. Because that discussion that we just had about the leading indicators make me think about product market fit. Because I talk a lot and I speak a lot about product market fit recently with a lot of people. I'm teaching that, to some founders and stuff like that. How do you get to product market fit in an API product where it's not the success of your API, it's the success of your clients use your API? So that's what I wonder.
It's a very complicated challenge, and I think it's different for every API. And I think that's what one of the things that makes working on APIs so interesting is product market fit has factors in it that are driven by core business. And I think the second more important aspect is the customer's pain point. So it's like, and this interesting thing where, Uber developers knew that they needed Google Maps APIs, but most most companies or healthcare providers who are integrating with Twilio to improve their customer service flows don't actually know that they need Twilio. There's more you know outbound sales that makes that happen. So very, very different approaches in
Interesting.
terms of like who that product market fit. How do you identify it, and like what does it look like for your API could be very different. And
Yeah.
then based on that, the model evolves. Where do you invest more in your just having people sign up, and maybe you invest more in developer outreach or developer programs, or because that's your funnel, versus do you invest more in sales because your product is more partner driven, enterprise driven. So your sales strategy, your marketing strategy, your positioning strategy, everything would depend on what your services are, who wants it. And I think
Absolutely.
that's consistent across every product.
Absolutely. It's like any other product. But usually when you get to product market fit, you can remove your foot from the pedal. You don't have to push as hard because people will come to you. So I was talking before about PCI compliancy. If I had at the time that I had developed that, if I had a product that I was be able to offload all of my merchant processing of the credit card to someone else, then I would, with two hands, I would grab it and say, okay, I'm going to use that. I don't need to deal with this PCI stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because it was very hard. It took us months and months and months and to become compliant. So the need was definitely there, but maybe that's what led me to think, and maybe you can confirm it or not, that that's probably why there is not as many API companies or API product as there are products in general in the world, right? Or successful ones. So probably the ratio there is, I have no idea what the ratio is, but the for every 100 companies that are creating digital products, how many API products are there or API companies?
So I'm sure that there's more products out there than there are API products out there. I
Right.
could totally confirm that. I think that's true. But I
I think,
think it's also because the API products are enabling the consumer products.
yeah,
So,
Hmm.
so many developers are building consumer-centric apps,
yes,
but they're using all these APIs in the
yes,
back.
yes.
They might be using 10, 15, and have millions of users.
Hmm.
So there are, thousands, hundreds of thousands of apps now that are maybe using limited number of APIs or, much less than the number of products they sell and
Mhm.
the consumer base that they serve. And I think that's where the challenge is you're as an API PM, you're not you're selling uh, something very interesting. Like you're selling this technology product to a developer persona, which looks very different from selling makeup or handbags. So it's
Yeah, absolutely.
there is there's an interesting thing. The way I think about it is like uh, want versus need. Most of product marketing is very oriented towards, oh, I want that bag.
Mm.
I want those shoes. But then when you actually go on the technology product side, like I worked in lending for a long time, a person who's trying to evaluate a loan they're taking is like, I need this loan.
Hmm.
What can I afford?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
So the need-based consumer decision where it's like, oh, I need this API because I can't afford to build this thing on my own. I need to figure
Yep.
this out
hmm
is a very different consumer mindset versus, oh, this looks cool. I need to have it.
yeah, yeah.
That's a great way to think about it. Wants and needs. This is a fascinating conversation. This is great.
Yeah, we could have continued this forever, but I think that time is limited. But really, really fascinating. And I'm really glad that you came to the show. And I'm sure this is going to be really helpful for Matt, with your new position as an
Mhm.
API product manager.
Yeah. This has been great. Thank you, Deepa, for coming on the show. Thank you for writing the book for product managers like myself out here doing this kind of work.
This was really fun. I think we were able to cover a lot of interesting aspects of, how the book came about, how APIs came about, how people can approach APIs as products, and what future looks like for both APIs and API product managers. So I'm really glad to have been part of this conversation.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Where can people reach out to you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn as Deepa Goyal. You can find me. I'm also fairly active on Twitter. My handle is one sprint at a time.
Okay.
I like that.
All one word, like with the words one.
One number.
Oh, okay.
One is a number.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you, Moshe. And thank you to all the listeners. We'll talk to everybody next time. Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.